It is an existential threat. Stop the war. Defeat Russia. Give Ukraine back what is Ukraine's.
Україну підтримує світ, і кожен працює на своєму фронті. Ми продовжуємо міжнародний проєкт Joint Efforts Canada&Ukraine спільними зусиллями до перемоги. Я Оксана Мельник, і ми розпочинаємо. Сьогодні в мене в гостях канадський сенатор Стен Кутчер. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Я хочу наше інтерв'ю, власне, розпочати з дати. 24 лютого 2022 рік. Весь світ спостерігав за даним днем. І ви особисто. У вас в цей день з'являється допис у соціальній мережі Facebook, я готова його процитувати. Ми є свідками злочинного нападу на Україну, на міжнародне верховенство права. Напад на цінності, яким мають чинити опір всі ті, хто живе в умовах демократичної свободи. Сьогодні вранці я переглянув карту, де показані місця ракетних та авіаційних ударів. Київ, Львів, далеко від Тернополя. Там моя родина, мої зв'язки є глибоко в Україні. Мої батьки були біженцями Другої світової війни. Вони знали, що таке тиранія насправді. Вони втратили все. Більшість моїх родичів відправили до ГУЛАГу. Ті, хто вижив, були кинуті на звалище життя. Дехто віднайшов собі дорогу назад, деякі ні. Нам треба бути на боці України і діяти необхідно не завтра, а саме сьогодні. Як каже гімн України, ще не вмерла Україна, ні слава, ні воля. Що у вас особисто, власне, відбувалось в цей день?
When I woke up that day and heard the news, I had two immediate thoughts. My first thought was, I hope our family is safe. What will happen to them? My second thought was, and this may sound harsh, I am really glad my mother died before this happened. She had died just about a month or so before this happened. Because if she had seen this and then gone to her grave, it would have been horrible for her. And my third thought was, maybe the Russians don't really know what the spirit of the Ukrainian people is like. And I hope that the Western countries will rally behind Ukraine as quickly as possible. Because, although on the face of it, it looks like Putin and Russia invading Ukraine, this is not just an invasion of Ukraine. It is an existential threat to the rules-based world order, and it is the signal of intensive aggression from hugely powerful states on the very values of Western democracy.
Якщо говорити далі, 3 позиції, які потрібні Україні. Зброя, санкції і кошти. Канада підтримує Україну впродовж 2022 року. Рік триває війна в Україні. Рік гинуть люди. Буча, Гостомель, Краматорськ, Маріуполь. Чи готова Канада й надалі впродовж року безперервно підтримувати Україну до її перемоги?
You're right. This is a genocidal war. There is no other way to characterize this. It is driven by an understanding of the world which is horribly flawed, megalomaniac in its construct, and unrespectful of the need for people to live in peace. It is a war that is driven by some bizarre imperial fantasy of a ruthless dictator who cares not only nothing for Ukraine, but cares nothing for the young man he sends from Russia to be killed in Ukraine.
Yes.
And nothing for his people who are suffering from the sanctions in Ukraine. So we have a ruthless man with a ruthless military and a state-controlled media, which is wreaking havoc on Ukraine, on the rest of the world through the impact on fertilizer, fuel, and food, and on his own people. Now, Canada has stepped up, and I am very proud that Canada has stepped up. We're a middle power. We have done what we can, and I think we need to do more. Canada has stepped up not just directly by supporting with funds and with armaments, but also very much indirectly. And sometimes people don't realize this. Canada has spent tremendous amount of effort working with and convincing our allies to do more. So I'm actually very proud of our government. I'm proud of the leadership that our government has shown, not just in its bilateral relationships with Ukraine, but in its exhortation of the multilateral, multi-world response to this genocidal aggression.
На вашу думку, наразі діють санкції проти Росії, які застосував світ?
I think that they have been a good start. And as you can see over time, those sanctions became more harsh, and those sanctions have gone further. Personally, I would have liked to see more substantive sanctions happening much earlier. In fact, there were discussions that suggested that the West should apply sanctions on Putin and sadly on Russia that way before the invasion occurred. That didn't happen. But afterwards, they started and then they ramped up and they ramped up. And I think you see that in Canada, we have actually gone a long way to say not only will we freeze the assets of oligarchs and companies, but we will utilize the assets to help with the reconstruction of Ukraine. I would like to see every single country participate in the sanctions. I understand that there are differences of opinion amongst other countries. I understand that some countries are so dependent on Russia for arms, for fuel, for other interests that they hesitate to join. But the most democratic countries are together.
До нашого з вами обговорення я хочу додати ще одну історію, яка відбулась 4 квітня 2022 року. Ваш онук, якому 9 років, передав вашій доньці кошти. Сума складала $10.85 і попросив саме їх передати Україні, аби Україна перемогла і чим пошвидше відвоювала свою територію. Через 4 дні ви особисто дану історію розповіли своїм колегам публічно. Як вони відреагували на дану історію і як ця історія вплинула на вас?
You know, there is much wisdom that comes from our children. And one of the challenges of being an adult is ensuring that you listen to the wisdom. And when my grandson said that, I thought, how amazing, because I didn't prompt him on that.
Mm-hmm.
This was happening when I was in Ottawa. He was in Halifax. It was amazing to me, number one, that he was aware and understood. 7 years old, and he understood what the issue was. And he took every penny that he had saved at that time, he spends a lot, but he took every penny that he had saved and said, I want this to go. And I thought to myself, if every person in Canada gave the equivalent of a couple of $100, now I know that every person doesn't have the financial resources to do that, so if they can give $10, but people who have the resources can give 10 times as much or 1,000 times as much, what a difference that would make. And to me, it was an example both of understanding what was happening, but an understanding of the obligation that a human being has to intervene when injustice is being done.
Що для вас означає незалежність?
Independence can have personal connotations. It can have community connotations. It can have connotations for geopolitical entities. I'll focus on the geopolitical entities of states. The ability of people who live in a geopolitical boundary unit to be able to themselves make their own decisions about how they will live their lives, how they will govern themselves, how they will act amongst themselves, what are the values that they share, how do they express those values, how do they solve their differences, how do they, as a unit, interact with the rest of the units of the world on their own.
В 1991 році Україна отримала свою незалежність. Ми міцно тримаємо фронт, ми її утримаємо і ми точно переможемо. Разом з тим, воюючи, багато жінок, дітей і чоловіків, їм дійсно складно, і повертаючись з війни, не завжди вони здорові, але вони мають психічний розлад. У вас, як в експерта, медичного лікаря, я хочу запитати, як нам, українцям, боротися з тим, що ми бачимо? А ми бачимо війну, ми бачимо смерть, ми бачимо смерть дітей, смерть батьків і смерть наших воїнів. Яким чином вдається це пережити?
I will answer that question, and thank you. That's a very, very deep and important question. And it's a question that we need to keep foremost in our minds. I will answer that question both from my professional knowledge, but from my personal upbringing and understanding. I've never personally experienced being in a war. I've worked in war zones, but I've never experienced being in a war as a civilian or in the military. But I heard the stories from my grandparents, Papa and Jido, Mama and Tato, my relatives who were. And they are stories that we don't need to repeat because anyone understands what they are. They came through that, thank goodness. They weren't unscarred. And we know that those experiences last a lifetime.
Okay.
And they can re-emerge later in your life. And my Baba, Ajido, and my uncle suffered from those experiences later in their lives. So the idea that it's only the children now that's the problem is not correct. It's that it will affect you for your entire life. There is one absolutely imperative solution. Stop the war. Defeat Russia. Give Ukraine back what is Ukraine's. Stop the war. The longer the war goes on, the more damage we cause to the people who are experiencing it. In all of medicine, it's better to prevent than to treat. If we want to prevent the huge toll on the mental and physical health of people, stop the war. That's the first thing we need to do. Then we need to build the capacity to help people support each other, and those who are suffering from a mental disorder as a result of that need to have the treatments and interventions, and so we have to help Ukraine build its capacity in that. But people will heal. Communities will come together. Families who are not hiding from bombs will support each other, and they will improve, and a lot of the mental anguish and turmoil will subside. It'll never go away completely, but it will subside, and they'll be able to live healthy and productive lives. It's so important, however, to understand that through all this tragedy and attack and destruction, it's the support of those who most matter to the children that is so important. So one of the things that we can do, and we need to do more of, is support the families so that they have electricity, so that they have food, so that they have the supplies, so that they don't have to worry about, am I going to starve tomorrow? Am I going to freeze tomorrow? Because then the parents can't help to support their children. My mother wrote a book. It's called Raya's Story. It's on Amazon, actually. Many years ago, I hired my cousin's daughter to interview my mother. She was a student at the University of Toronto. To interview my mother, that was her summer job, to interview my mother and to then use that interview and write a book. It was called Raya's Story. And it was the story of my mother from her earliest days in Ukraine until the time that the book was written. And there was a lot on the war and about her early life and everything else. And one of the things that strikes me and sticks out for me was she was talking about her experiences as a young girl during the war. Now, they left Ukraine with nothing. A bag of bread that they had stowed beside the door and a bag of warm clothes, because they knew at any time they would be taken away. And they went through horrors. And she wrote in that book, she said, although the war was terrible, and I'm paraphrasing, I never realized how bad it really was because I had my mother and my father who loved and protected me. And that's the key. So part of what we have to do, not only in Canada, but every country, we have to ensure that the shelter, the safety, and the security of Ukrainian families is dealt with now. Give them what they need to survive these winters. Give them what they need so they know that they will have food on the table. If we can't protect them all the time from these terrible bombs, give them what they need so they can shelter. Those are the first things that we have to do. And then when this is over, and hopefully it is over soon, then we have to rebuild, and then we have to move in and help as much as we can, as quickly as we can.
Через ситуацію, яка вже понад рік триває в Україні, а саме дійсно ця клята війна, по-іншому її не можна назвати, в жовтні була розпочата програма хірургічної допомоги Канади в Україні CUCAP, Канадсько-Української фундації. Розкажіть, будь ласка, про неї більш детально. Що це, власне, йде за програма?
I don't know all the details. I have spoken to people who have started the program and are developing it, and I think it's fantastic. They're doing an incredible job. But we need more. It's like this glass of water, you know, it's partly full. We need the glass completely full, right? And I would like to see more support, more funding. I'm very concerned as the war drags on that we're starting to see Ukraine fatigue. At the beginning, we had this swell of enthusiasm and a huge swell of support. As the war drags on, it becomes less on the front pages. People tend to forget. And that kind of financial support, which is so important for this program, but for other programs like it, has dwindled. And I think we need to do much more, and I hope that this interview will help with that. We have to do much more to reignite Canadians with that passion to support. Because I'm worried that Putin, who is sacrificing his own people, is content to have hundreds of thousands of young Russian men die over the time that we lose interest. He doesn't care. If it's 100,000 young Russian men, he doesn't care. If it's 1 million Russian men, he doesn't care. But Canadians have to understand that. And that it was important that we give support at the beginning of the war. But right now, when Ukraine has proven that not only can it withstand the assault, but that they are probably able to win, now we need to give even more support.
Ви відкритий до України, ви відкритий до українців. Анна Зайцева, українка, яка прибула до Канади, в якої ви особисто брали інтерв'ю. Вона з Маріуполя. І поділилася з вами своєю історією, яка понад 65 днів перебувала в підземці з 3-місячною дитиною. Розкажіть про це більш детально.
I just want to share with you how important those stories are for helping people better understand what it's like to live through that kind of situation. People understand cognitively when they read in the newspaper.
Yes.
Oh yeah, this happened. But they don't understand emotionally. And sometimes you see the pictures of the destroyed buildings and everything, and you think, oh, that's horrible, and then it'll go on. But when people hear what another human being went through, all of a sudden they say, oh my goodness, that could have been my sister. That could have been my brother. Could have been me. And it's those kind of stories which we must have more of. I saw the film. It was fantastic. And it has a really important role to play as a film. But frankly, you're in the business. You and I both know that the normal attention span of somebody who is looking through 1 or 2 minutes. What I would like to see are many, many more of these stories everywhere on social media. Because if we can get those stories out as wide as possible to as many people as possible, then maybe people have a better understanding. And if they understand, they will act. That's what I tried to do with this. I did the interview because I wanted that interview to go as wide as possible and have people respond to the interview and then act. I don't know how impactful that was. But I would be willing to do many, many more of those short stories to get the stories out. She is a heroic woman.
Yes.
But she will carry the scars of that for her existence. And for when we look at her, we see her courage, and we see her resolve, and we see her resilience. But what most people don't see, I'm a psychiatrist, I see it, how much she hurts inside.
Продовжуючи тему українських жінок і українського народу, ті, хто перебував в Канаді, від самого початку вони виходили на мітинги. Мітинги були в Торонто, в Оттаві, по всій Канаді. Канадці підтримували Україну, канадці підтримують Україну. Яке ваше ставлення до мітингів? Ви підтримували мітинги, які проходили в підтримку України?
I was at some of the rallies in Ottawa. The rallies that were in other places I could not attend because they conflicted with the work that I have to do here. And my Senate business here takes my precedence.
Mm-hmm.
The rallies are important because they signal support. Rallies are important because they generate media coverage, and then that media coverage goes across the country. Rallies are important because they encourage the spirit, but they're not enough.
На вашу думку, зараз, коли рік війни в Україні, чи потрібно далі підтримувати Україну мітингами, говорити про це в соціальних мережах, в медіамережах? Адже велика кількість дезінформації з боку ворога, з боку Росії.
Yes, I think it is, because of a number of different reasons. One of the reasons is it will help counter the Ukraine fatigue that I see in the population. So when we have rallies, when we have people getting together, when we have media coming to cover those rallies, when people in the city see that this is happening, it reignites the interest in this. And the asks, there have to be asks from the rallies. There have to be calls to action. Okay, we need you to donate.
Yes.
We need you to talk to your member of parliament. We need you to support this, okay? So there has to be an ask from the rally. The second thing that I think is really important is that Russia is one of the world leaders in spreading disinformation.
Yes.
And much of my work currently and in the past was dealing with the disinformation in health. And in 2014, 2015, I realized that Russia was joining forces with the people who were spreading disinformation about vaccines as a way to try to destabilize Western societies. And I got involved in working against this stuff then. And when the COVID hit Canada, I had an important role to play along with one of my colleagues, Timothy Caulfield at the University of Alberta. He's a professor of law. We catalyzed the creation of an organization called Science Up First, which is a pre-bunking and debunking of misinformation. But I've seen the Russian misinformation machine in full throttle well before the war started. And I see the Russian misinformation, disinformation machine here in the people who are protesting against the democratic institutions that keep our country strong. And they're being pushed, and I see where the feeds are coming from, and I see the conspiracy theories, and Russia is very involved in pushing these to sow discord, not only against Ukraine, but sow discord in democracy so that we will implode from within. And there's so many people don't realize how important that is and how pernicious and threatening that is to us. And Russia is a big player in this. So I think rallies can be part of the countering the disinformation, how important they are to say, Russia is saying this is not true. Okay? If it's on Fox News and it's pro-Russia, it's not true.
Yes.
Okay? So that's the kind of thing that rallies can help. It can bring those other kind of resources to help fight against the spread of disinformation as well. So rallies are important.
Український прапор знають вже в усьому світі. Про Україну чули. Володимира Зеленського знають в усьому світі. Зайшовши сьогодні до вас в кабінет, я також побачила український прапор з надписами. Він наразі знаходиться позаду нас. Розкажіть про нього більш детально. Що це за прапор? Хто вам його подарував? І що це за надпис?
And you see it is right beside the Canadian flag. And in my office, I have both flags.
Yes.
I have a little one on my desk too.
Yes. And the piece.
Oh, and a pen. Yeah, of course. Yes.
Yes.
Because I'm proud to be of heritage of Ukraine. I'm proud to be Canadian. And I think that shows how important that relationship and that solidarity is. That Ukrainian flag was given to me by people who had come to Canada to seek refuge. And they were at an oblast, a summer camp, and I went to visit them. I thought it was very important to be able to go, and not just to welcome them, but in my role as a senator, as a Canadian senator, to let them know that at this level of government in Canada, there are people who care. Because I care, and many of my colleagues care, and they were amazing. They gave me this flag, and so many of the people, not all, but so many of the people wrote their names on it. And now this is one of my most treasured possessions, because it tells me that the flag is the symbol of the country.
Yes.
Those are real people. So what this flag means to me is not only reflecting how I see the importance of the symbol of the country, but how important I see that there are people in that country. There are people who deserve peace.
Yes.
There are people who deserve to be free. There are people who deserve to go about their own lives. And that Canada has to keep doing everything that we can to make that happen.
Моє передостаннє запитання на сьогодні буде стосуватися надзвичайно важливої теми. Вона стосується теми пандемії, а саме COVID-2019. Які наразі існують в загальному гарантії безпеки, аби не відбулось повторного спалаху пандемії? Адже це, повторюсь, надзвичайно важливо для всього світу.
We're still in the pandemic. Last week, the WHO issued in their note, this is not over. We have seen wave after wave after wave of this pandemic. What has struck me, and I'm speaking now as a physician, I'm a physician, what has struck me, how difficult it is for us to learn about what we need to do, and do quickly. When this pandemic hit Canada, we were not prepared. It wasn't that we didn't know that we had to be prepared.
Yes.
We had the SARS outbreak here. There was the Naylor report that showed what had to be done. Inaction. And when COVID hit us, we had chaotic time. Sadly, the impact of COVID is, I think, at base threefold. And this is going to bother us and make us struggle for decades. Number one is what we call long COVID. This virus has shown that it stays even after you're no longer COVID positive. The inflammation that it causes, inflammatory response, persists. It persists in the brain. It persists in the respiratory tract, in your bronchi, alveoli, your lungs. And it persists in the gut, your stomach linings. And now what we're seeing is that for some people, this persistence is relatively mild. They will have stomach problems, they will have occasional brain fog, headaches, whatever, and they will have coughs. But for some people, it's devastating. And we know that they can't return to work. And now we're getting the economic impact of this, the impact on our healthcare systems, the impact on how do we treat this. And that's going to be a huge drain for us. I'd like to say that Canada has taken a leadership role in dealing with this, but it hasn't. And we've tried in this office and with other people to put this on top of agenda, but we haven't got there yet. But this is going to be a huge problem for us, the health of our population going forward from COVID. The second thing is that COVID has accelerated the disinformation campaigns. And we see a very, very strong separation between people who believe the disinformation around COVID, who believe the disinformation about everything. So the disinformation about what COVID is, the disinformation about vaccines, they all bring people down into this swamp of conspiracy theories, of anti-democratic institutions, of what I call inchoate anger. There's just this anger that just spreads everywhere. And sadly, and we see this very much in our neighbor to the south, there are people politically who want to utilize this as a weapon. And I think that that is going to plague our societies for a long time because COVID has shown us the cracks in our democracies. It has shown the cracks for how we live with and deal with each other. And then the final thing, I know you want to ask another question, is that it is anti-science. It has developed a whole group of people who think science is nonsense. And it's the only thing that we have is the scientific method and the way to understand the world through science. You know, if you step off the top of a 20-story building, you will die because science says there's something called gravity. And we have seen this. I see it all the time. Germs don't exist. Yes, they do. They will kill you, right? And yet there's all these people now, oh, germs don't exist. No, well, vaccines are taking your life. People are putting microchips in vaccines so the world will be controlled by the World Health Organization. It's complete and utter nonsense. So COVID has really given us problems. We're not through COVID yet. We're not through the phases. This virus will mutate in ways that we cannot guess. It may mutate and become more virulent than it is now. That means it spreads more rapidly, and it can become more dangerous. I hope to goodness that we don't get a virus which spreads more rapidly than Omicron with the death rate of Alpha Delta. That would be horrible, but it could. The other thing is it could mutate itself out of existence. That could happen too, but we don't know what's going to happen. But the legacy of the COVID, the health legacy, the economic legacy, and the social disruptive legacy is going to be with us a long time.
Якщо брати питання війни в Україні і питання ковіду, давайте допустимо, що розпочалась пандемія. На вашу думку, чи припиниться тоді війна, або іншим чином, чи пандемія повпливає на ситуацію, яка наразі відбувається в Україні? Тому що про це говорять. Про це говорить Європа і про це говорить світ.
War makes everything worse. Everything. Not only does it cause death and destruction, it allows all sorts of diseases to spread. Not just COVID, cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, all the infectious diseases spread rapidly during war. It causes malnutrition. It adds to huge stress for people so that their immune response is less robust because of the ongoing severe stress that they're under. It makes them more infectious and susceptible to diseases. It makes living conditions unsanitary. The water can be contaminated. What you eat can be contaminated. Many people don't understand in our societies, we can drink this without fear. We can eat bread off the shelf without fear. Why? Because we have structures in place to ensure we have clean and safe water. We have structures in place to ensure that our food supply is safe. War disrupts all of that. It disrupts the supply chains. So that if medicine is needed somewhere, we can't get the medicine there because it disrupted the supply chain. It damages the infrastructure. The hospitals get damaged. The road to the hospital gets damaged. You have a heart attack and the road is broken because of a missile strike. You can't get there, you die. All these things happen with war. War is really bad for everybody. And if we get a humongous brand new COVID outbreak during the war will make it very difficult for Ukraine or any other country to effectively deal with it. I just hope that it doesn't happen. You know, war, pestilence, and famine and disease go together, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And each one makes the other one worse. But war is the worst of everything. War just disrupts every single aspect that we have created in our social societies. It disrupts our safety nets. It disrupts our ability to communicate and help and treat each other. It just disrupts everything. So you know what? The final point here is the war has to stop. It has to stop with victory for Ukraine.
Фінальне моє питання, яке я, власне, ставлю кожному своєму гостю. Як ви вважаєте, Україна здобуде свою довгоочікувану перемогу?
I think Ukraine will win if the West gives them the tools to win.
Thank you. Thank you.